You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority. But the state is still formidable. Or is it? You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society. Let's dive headfirst into The White Pill Box with your host, Mark Maresca.
Greetings all. Thank you so much for joining today. My special guest today is Larken Rose himself. Welcome, Larken, to The White Pill Box.
Yeehaw. Thanks for having me.
It is unlikely anyone watching right now would not know who Larken Rose is, but you never know. Larken is a long-term voluntarist, author of several books, premier amongst them being The Most Dangerous Superstition. His website, the Rose Channel, is a treasure trove of awesome content, including his course, Candles in the Dark. That's his groundbreaking seminar on training yourself to communicate the liberty message effectively, and I can vouch, folks, it works. Larken was also the screenwriter for the feature film Jones Plantation. If you aren't familiar with that film, you need to see it and get everyone you know to see it. Of course, all this and more will be in the show notes, so please check it all out. Today, it's part one of my two-part interview with Larken. Today, we'll be discussing libertarian pragmatism, in particular, the tendency of libertarian pragmatists to justify their political involvement by comparing candidates or comparing policies or measures and trying to determine which is more libertarian. So, Larken, I'd like to hand it to you and have you start commenting on that.
I know our second topic is going to be psychology. It's going to be hard not to immediately slide into that here.
It's okay.
Because the thing that all the pragmatic libertarians miss, aside from the fact that it doesn't work, like they've been trying to vote for the better candidate for 200 years and look where we are. Did it work? No. But they miss something way more destructive in that entire attitude, in that entire approach, which is the things you're sort of conceding to the rest of the world who are watching. You're like, well, they voted for this, or they ran this candidate, or they whatever. Every bit of that reinforces the notion that, well, of course elections are legitimate. Of course whoever wins has the right to rule. Of course our system of law is blah, blah, blah. It's legitimate, and this is how it is going to be. This is how it has to be. And the grand total of options available to us mere peasants is to bicker over which master we're going to bow to. And even though I don't really like either master, this master is much nicer than that master. And the trouble is, the thing that matters, and the thing that I harp on constantly, is the belief in authority in the minds of the people. That does nothing to whittle away at that. It actually strengthens it. And I sometimes compare it to if you're, you stumble across some tribe that believes in throwing people into a volcano to appease the volcano god to get better weather for their crops or something or other. If you go around saying, like, there's no volcano god, that's just a big geothermal, like, I can explain to you how it works. It's not a god. You're murdering innocent people. It's not helping. If somebody goes, well, I mean, they're not really going to listen to that. Let's be more pragmatic and talk about the best ways to appease the volcano god. And maybe, like, instead of throwing this many people, we'll throw fewer people into it. And while the people who didn't get thrown in might go, well, that's an improvement, you did absolutely nothing to try to undo the entire problem, which is they believe in a volcano god and they're murdering people because of it. And so the symptoms may have gotten a little bit less nasty, but the underlying disease and the problem is just as bad as it always was. You did nothing to actually solve it. And when it comes to voting, you didn't even fix the symptoms either. Like, it also doesn't work. Even if it worked, you'd be reinforcing statism and all the weird rituals. So, but it doesn't even work. It doesn't even do that. So it's useless in practical terms, and in philosophical terms, it's massively counterproductive because you're strengthening the one bogus belief that we need to do away with.
What's one of the things that strikes me about that is kind of what you're leading to, and that is they claim to be pragmatic. And in fact, they speak pejoratively often. When you see some of these Twitter battles, you'll see, well, we're the adults in the room. We're the ones who have our heads on. We're looking at the concrete black and white real world. We're realistic. But you guys, you principled, you're living in Ancapistan in your head. Your head is in an ivory tower. But as you just said, whatever it is that they want, they never get. It never works. But I thought you guys are the ones who are living in the real world. An adult doesn't spend time doing things that don't achieve the actual ends they claim to. So right there, they're, I don't know if it's hypocritical or contradictory, but it doesn't make sense in that sense.
And I think part of it is actually their own psychology, where they don't have to look too kooky and extreme. And if they're like inside the game of who do we vote for, and we believe in a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that, because it sounds weird and kooky to tell the whole world, yeah, you know, this thing that you all believe in, it's bogus and insane. That the notion of political authority in government, that's bonkers start to finish. That's an uncomfortable position to be in, to tell the whole world, yeah, just the foundation of one of your main beliefs about society is insane and anti-human and all that. It's much more comfortable to, well, we'll sort of concede the whole ruling class thing and then we'll bicker about the details. But yeah, it's not even pragmatic. And one of the ways I like to point that out, and I don't know that I've ever gotten a coherent response to this, is, okay, so you want sort of a limited libertarian-ish government that mostly lets people be free. That was sort of tried once. It was the Constitution of the United States. So pretending for a moment you have the slightest prayer in hell of actually getting that again, let's look at history. What did that result in? Did the best attempt ever at limited government create the biggest authoritarian empire in the history of the world? Yes or no? Yes, it did. Why are you trying to do that again? Like, even on a practical level, why would you think there'd be a different outcome? And there's no way you're going to start with that anyway. There's no way you're going to get people to vote. Like, if anybody ran for office and actually like said, I'm going to stick by the Constitution and really would, they'd get no votes anyway at the moment. But even if by some miracle you could get Thomas Jefferson elected, we already know the outcome. It already happened. We're already living it. How on earth can you pretend to be pragmatic? And I know this triggers some people, but it's the same thing I say about communists. If your idea, when applied to real world, results in massive authoritarianism and oppression, your idea sucks. Don't say it wasn't done right. That's what the commies do. It can't be done right. And to pretend you're being pragmatic to try something again that literally created the biggest authoritarian empire in the history of the world is kind of bonkers, and in no way is practical or pragmatic or rational. It's just comfortable. And I think that's why they do it, because that discussion for them is comfortable, and talking to people, trying to talk them out of politics entirely, is way more difficult and way more uncomfortable. So we'll sort of be in the ballpark that everybody's comfortable with, accomplish nothing. And then when people say, how about principles? Well, you're just being utopian, you're purity spiral, and all the silly ways they complain about that.
They also often try to sneak in an analogy that they use a lot. That's really a false analogy, I think, for this situation, namely a comparison of, well, the recent one that we went over was you live on a slave plantation, and this is not a Jones plantation reference, this is just an analogy on its own, where overseer A beats you once a month and overseer B beats you daily. And it's put up to a vote which overseer you'll have. They try to say, see, well, right there, you would pick overseer A, even though you don't recognize the legitimacy of that situation. Wouldn't you do that? And they leap from that false analogy to justify political participation.
Yeah. And again, there are practical reasons why that doesn't make any sense. If 49% of voters believe in freedom, but they're going to vote for the lesser of two evils, 49% is going to lose. Okay, you tried really hard to vote. You didn't even try for freedom. You tried for the lesser of two evils, and there were 49% of you, and you lost. If 49% of you don't believe in ruling classes and disobey, there's not even a revolution. It's just the empire collapses. So the idea that there will be enough people to vote freedom into existence, which is an oxymoron, but there wouldn't be enough people to disobey freedom into existence, is on a practical level is just bonkers. Like 10% of the population saying we're just not paying your stupid taxes would crash the tax system. 10% saying we're not obeying this dumb law and that dumb law would crash literally any empire in the history of the world. But again, it's about the comfort, the psychological comfort of the people arguing it, because the discussion of what if we just disobeyed them is really uncomfortable for most people, especially most statists. But, and I recently made a video about that, even most pro-freedom people don't like to talk about, we don't have any obligation to give these people money or do anything they say. Now, they have lots of mindless armed thugs, so you may go along with a bunch to avoid being shot or thrown in a cage. But that's an uncomfortable discussion for most people. And there's a lot of libertarians who like, I don't really want the uncomfortable discussion. Let's talk about how do we change the law? How do we get our master to tell us we're allowed to work fewer hours in the cotton fields or what, like, that's, you've already conceded philosophically that you should be a slave. And now you're doing something that in practical terms also isn't going to work either, as demonstrated by all of human history. So it's sort of weird. And I think they don't even realize that it's really an escape for them to not have to argue something way more uncomfortable and profound, or just bicker around the edges.
Right, right. And also, it's so rare that life presents us with hard, clear choices like they like to use in the analogy. So if you were in a concentration camp and they let you vote whether you get milk at your meals or plain old water, there's a decent chance you'll vote for that, not because you recognize, well, I wouldn't speak for you, but I probably would, just because this is the best I can make of my situation. The fact that they put it up to a vote was some stupid, weird thing they did, but it doesn't mean I acknowledge or legitimize what they're doing. And I think the overseer example is a little like that. If he says, I'll whip you once a day, whip you once a month, yeah, you'd say, all right, well, whip me once a month if you're going to give me the choice. But that's not actually what politics is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's a major distinction. Like when there are referendum, like vote on this referendum to pass this stupid tax or not, or some dumb thing. When people say, well, I'm going to vote against that, to me, that's not nearly as bad. You're still sort of playing the game and kind of legitimizing it, but it's on a practical level. What you're not doing is saying, I'm going to help give this person power over me. When you're voting for a candidate, that's exactly what you're doing. So the people who say, well, I voted for Trump because Kamala would have been blah, blah, blah. Okay, there are people, real people in real life being murdered on an almost daily basis as a direct result of you helping to empower that guy. Now, he's mostly a puppet of other people anyway, but that's another issue. So it isn't just, well, I asked for fewer whippings. It's I helped empower this person and give him the ability, along with the machine that he's part of, to violently dominate my fellow man. Like all the nasty things they're doing to, well, presumably doing to illegal aliens, which is bad enough, but they're actually doing it to U.S. citizens and everybody under the sun. But the real victims of that, if you say, well, it wasn't as bad as, yeah, but you helped make that evil happen. If you vote against the referendum for some new tax, you didn't help evil happen. You just tried to make a particular example of evil not happen. But if you put someone into a position of power because you think the other one would be worse, you still put someone into a position of power. In the real world destruction of that, you kind of bear partial responsibility for having done that. And it's amazing how rarely, like, practical libertarians or whatever, that whole category takes responsibility for the real world outcome of, well, Kamala would have been worse. It's like, any supporter of any horrible regime, well, the Weimar Republic as it was would have been worse. So yeah, some people are being murdered, but whatever. I'm not going to take any responsibility for literally trying to empower the people who are literally doing exactly that to real people. I'm just going to point at some theoretical, hypothetical, didn't really happen, supposedly worse thing that other people would have empowered. It's like, how about don't empower either evil? Is that really that much to ask? But apparently it is.
I think you hit on the psychology of the pragmatists in a way that made me start thinking about what is really happening in their mind. And I think this is probably the real distinction between the principle and the pragmatist. I think the pragmatist looks, and when I say looks, their mind sort of does this scan of all the policies and all the potentials and all the good and all the bad. And they know, if they're at least honest enough libertarian, they're going to know some of those policies will result in more innocent victims. But they also believe that some will not. Some will be alleviated or whatever. And they do what I would call a net summation of all of that harm. And in the end, they have this figure, this sum, in there, mentally. And then they do the same thing for Harris. They did it for Trump, now they do it for Harris. They look at the two results and they see this is less than that. So that's my justification. The principled also looks across, I think, the spectrum and says differently, is there any single case of a new innocent victim anywhere in there? And if there is any case of that, I can't participate. And this is why, on a referendum type of thing, you could look at it and say, oh, look, they're going to raise the property taxes outright and do nothing else. Okay, new innocent victims. I don't like it. I could justify voting against that. But I think that is the big distinction between principle and pragmatism. One is comfortable looking at a summation. The other is simply not.
Yeah, and there's another fact. I mean, there's so many layers why it doesn't make any sense. But another one worth mentioning is lots of people are now looking at what Mango Mussolini and his stooges are doing and saying, I didn't vote for this. Yeah, you did. You voted to have him in power. What you hoped the master was going to do in power doesn't matter. You didn't vote for him to do what you want. You voted for him to be in power. He's in power. Again, he's a puppet of other people mostly. But still, the idea that, well, I was going to put this narcissistic psychopath into a position of power, I thought he was going to do good stuff. It's like, well, I let this wild tiger into our house. Now he's like eating my children and stuff. I didn't want that. Well, then maybe don't let a tiger in your house. Well, okay, I let him in, but I told him on his way in, don't eat the children, like protect the family and don't eat us. But he didn't. Yeah, you gave him the opportunity to have it be up to him. And if you vote someone into a position of power above yourself, which you're doing every time you vote for anybody for public office, by definition, what you want doesn't matter anymore. You put him into a position where he can violently control you and everybody else. And to be shocked that he didn't do what you want is like literal chattel slave being shocked that the master doesn't seem to care about my interests. No kidding. You are livestock to him. And if you help put someone in a position where they can treat you like livestock, then being shocked, well, I didn't want him to do this. Well, too bad. It's not up to you. You helped make it not be up to you. You helped put him into a position so that it's no longer up to you. And now you're complaining about the results. Like, oh, the tiger ate my children. Well, maybe don't let a tiger go in your house. But even that they miss. Even that they will talk about, oh, he betrayed us or he changed or he didn't do, like, you put him into a position of power. He used that position of power. Like, you helped do that. The fact that you didn't have the awareness and the presence of mind to figure out how this was going to go. Like, wow, I thought it was going to go great letting a wild tiger into my house. It wasn't going to. But the fact that you enabled that puts it on you, even if you're like, well, this isn't the outcome I wanted. The outcome you supported was somebody else having power over you. This is the outcome of that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also interesting how there's a psychological separation of responsibility that comes with democracy or voting, so that, you know, the end result that you see, you can make statements like, well, that's not what I voted for. But if you really bring it down to a specific, like a pragmatist should be able to justify the following. I'm going to pluck one of your eyes out because you have two good eyes, and I'm going to give that to a blind person. And guess what? The end result of that is two sighted people. Okay? So that's essentially what the pragmatist is prepared to advocate for. But he doesn't advocate that. Why? Because he sees you as a direct victim right in front of him. He can't, his inner sense of morality, what I call his true self, it can't permit that. But in the case of voting or democracy, you don't see the connection between your action in voting or participating and the fact that it empowers that end result. There's enough of a disconnect there to make you feel better.
And that's true of practical libertarians and every other statist in the world, is they all have that disconnect where they, like, an example I've used before is, like, for those who don't know, probably everybody listening does, I spent a year in a cage for not sending pieces of paper to the federal extortion racket for a misdemeanor. It wasn't even tax evasion. I don't even get to be a felon. I'm a misdemeanant. Be that as it may, when lots of people hear the story, they go, oh, that's so sorry that happened to you. And I'm like, wait, don't you vote like either Democrat or Republican? Well, yeah. Well, you know those people are going to tax everybody, right? And you know they're going to do not nice things to anybody who doesn't pay up. Why are you so sad that happened to me when literally you voted for exactly that to happen to any of your neighbors who don't bow to the extortion racket? And most of the time I try not to do this. It's a little bit too mean to people who try to mean well. But sometimes I do, to point out to them, like, they don't even recognize you empower the system that part of you knows. And it's that weird balance of status. Part of them knows it and part of them doesn't. It's this weird schizo. Because if you ask them, what happens to people who disobey, whether it's they don't pay taxes, they disobey a gun law, they smoke weed when it's illegal, like whatever law it is, if you walk them through it, they say, well, eventually guys with guns are going to show up and arrest you. It's like, well, that's what you voted for. So if you see that happen and go, oh, that's too bad, it's so schizophrenic and weird. Like, well, yeah, that is too bad, but you helped to make that happen. And part of you knew you helped make that happen and wanted to make that happen. But because of the mythology of authority and democracy, even when they know that they were part of the thing that made that happen, they're like, well, I'm not responsible. If it was up to me, it was up to you. You voted to have somebody in power who you knew would do that to people. And then they did that to people, including me. What do you mean if it was up to you? It was, and this is what you did. But they don't see that connection. And I think the left sees it even less often with the like, I just want free this and free that for everybody. It's like, how do you think they pay for that? They pay for that by extorting people like me and doing nasty things to those people if they don't pay up, like they did to me. That's the real world results of the free stuff you want given away. And I think those on the left sometimes are even more disconnected, that they would never make that connection on their own, that like, oh, well, that's not what I want. Like, where did you think the money came from? Just poof, magic fairy dust? But the whole formula of the voting in the Constitution and all that mythology, it's designed to have people feel disconnected from the immoral violence they vote for. Because they would never just hire some thug to rob me to give money to a poor person, because then they would feel bad. They would actually feel guilt and go, wow, I would never do that. But if you do a bunch of weird rituals and I just vote for it, I'll totally do that and feel all proud about my virtuous advocacy of mass extortion. It's so weird. But most people are that unaware of what they are personally involved in.
Often it'll devolve right down to probably the weakest comeback of all, which is, well, what else are you going to do? I mean, if you do nothing, that's all there is.
There are many things like that literally, they aren't saying anything. It's like, why did you throw a rock at me? Oh, this is the system we have. We throw rocks at each other. Like, but only because we do, and I don't, and you didn't have to. It's this all the way refusal to accept reality and just talk as if, well, this is, I wasn't me. And when cops do it, they're like, I don't make the law, I just enforce it. Yeah, but you chose to enforce it. Like, you're not just, somebody's not like remote controlling you. You have a brain, theoretically. You chose to enforce, you did this. And I talk about that in The Most Dangerous Superstition. The weirdness of having literally the guy with the gun using violence against somebody talking as if he didn't do it. I'm just enforcing the law. You're a guy using violence against somebody else. And you use these weird, vague terms. So it's only a few more steps disconnected when any voter, practical libertarian included, is sort of like, well, I didn't actually rob you or kidnap that person for not having a politician's permission to be somewhere. I just went into a booth and pressed a button next to a name, and then some other magical stuff happened. But you can't blame me for the real world outcome. It's like, but part of you knew the real world outcome, and then part of you denies it. It's so weird to watch. And I don't know any other setting in which humans are so sort of intentionally oblivious to what they're personally helping make happen.
That's why it seems clear that there's so much psychology behind it. When I've had conversations occasionally with, those who vote, who are libertarians, and we kind of talk about this sort of stuff, they will tend to devolve down to, well, I kind of see all your points, but what else is there to do? What would you do? You're telling me not to do anything. I would be doing nothing. And I've even tried coming back with, yes, but doing what you're doing accomplishes nothing. So you're actually expending calories for no reason. So if we can see that you're wasting your time, maybe we should start with you not doing that. Then we could talk about doing other things. But after a while, I think it occurred to me that I think that's a bit of a smokescreen, that answer. It's more about they like that they're doing it for other reasons. I think they get community, they get friendships in the Libertarian Party or whatever it is. They get to meet with people. And the prospect of not doing that seems to mean, oh, I'm not going to have my friends anymore. I won't have my cool conversations about liberty with them. What are your thoughts about that psychology?
Yeah, I should throw in that I was I was recently invited to speak at the Arizona Libertarian Convention coming up in January, I believe, happening down in Tucson. My immediate response was, you know what I think, right? And the person organizing is like, yeah, I want them to hear it. I was like, okay, like I will absolutely say it. A lot of them won't like it. This is actually the second time this happened. Something similar happened years ago, where a friend of mine, Jim Babb, was asked to organize the Pennsylvania Libertarian State Convention. What I don't even remember. And he was already a volunteer. So he's like, really? You want me to do it? Like, yeah, you're really good at organizing things, which he is. And so he invited me and James Bovard as the speakers, both of which made fun of the entire process of voting. But it was so weird because I gave it my talk there, which was about the futility and basically counterproductivity of voting and playing the game at all. A number of people there at the convention, like even like delegates and stuff, came up to me quietly afterwards and literally said, like exactly what you just said. They literally said, like, I totally agree with you, but I don't know what else to do. But then watching them go through, here's the delegate, all the formal, like, here's the things we do together that make us feel like an important organization. Yeah, there's absolutely a huge psychological thing that, like, we're important, right? We're acting like the big people in the big parties where we have delegates and we have votes and and I was sitting in the room just going, why do any of you think this matters in the slightest? But it's amazing when people come right out and say, which I'm sure you've heard this plenty, I've heard it a zillion times, when I say, stop trying to empower masters. Oh, so you want us to do nothing? Like, what a weird admission that is. Accidental admission. Like, I only said don't do one destructive, totally bogus thing. I didn't say don't do anything. But the fact that to so many people, not playing the game equals not doing anything shows the depth of the indoctrination. That, like some of them are still falling for the silliness of your vote is your voice, which is basically telling people, this is all you have to influence, like, that big weird machine that controls you and controls your life and controls all your neighbor is this weird ritual. So if you don't play this weird ritual, you don't have any power, you don't have any influence, you're not doing anything. And that massively disempowering message is constant and inherent to statism. And you can see how well it works even on pro-freedom people who they literally hear stop voting for masters as don't do anything. Like you said, doing nothing would literally be an improvement. It's like, but I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm saying don't do anything massively counterproductive and hypocritical. But you can see how much even people who sort of intellectually understand to one degree or another the ideas, their brains are still stuck in that paradigm of, well, this is the things we do to decide who sits on the throne. It's like, yeah, but by the time that discussion happens, you already lost. That already assumes the throne is legitimate. It already assumes these games are legitimate. But the fact that that registers as doing nothing, or you have no solutions, which I hear over and over again, because I don't vote for a master, I therefore don't have solutions. It shows how much this is all psychology. Among the people who are kind of mostly sort of pro-freedom, among the rest of the world, all the other statists. And even a bunch of pro-freedom people don't get how much the cult of statism still, to some degree, has a grip on their own brains, even when they think, no, I'm all the way enlightened and pro-freedom now. Now let's go argue over who the master should be and what laws should be passed.
Yeah. And it also illustrates how libertarian thinkers, or not even thinkers, that makes it sound too scholarly, people who agree with it, more or less red-pilled, are still humans, and they're still going to fall under the normal average person who basically thinks a little more concretely or short-term. It's harder for them to abstract. It's harder for them to take a step back or look at a 30,000-foot level of things. So the act of participation makes them at least convince themselves that they're going to achieve this little incremental victory. And when they see that, assuming it happens at all, they feel good. I've accomplished something. Whereas kind of keeping the big, broader perspective is never going to get you a small win, because that's not what it's about. And instead, you have to keep your mind on this big picture, if you're that kind of person, and just sort of watch the overall trends and be gratified when you see things trending. But that's hard to do, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and that's kind of a hugely profound topic, is how little people actually think objectively. Like, mostly they have a whole bunch of sort of foundational assumptions about government and politics, but about literally everything else. And then they sort of nitpick over little details, and the underlying thing they've never looked at and they don't know how to look at. And the result is that lots of people imagine themselves to be free thinkers, and I'll throw in this random example that's totally irrelevant to politics, having to do with evolutionary biology, of all things. I think the mainstream idea that just survival of the fittest and random mutation explains all life on Earth is just way completely wrong. Now, if somebody disagrees with me, it doesn't matter in the slightest. We can get along just fine. But so many people hear that and they say, so you don't believe in evolution? Like, how? No, evolution absolutely happened. I'm saying there are mechanisms at play, and I don't even know what they are, but I can prove there are mechanisms at play that are not just random mutation and then some things live long enough to reproduce. There's way more than that at play. I don't know what it is. But the fact that some people will come out and say, so you don't believe in evolution? You're like a creationist? It's like, so nitpicking about literally the mechanics of how a certain thing happened, that registers to them as you don't think evolution happened at all. It's like, no, it doesn't mean anything close to that. And there's a million different topics that I see people do that in. I see them debating each other about a million different things. And the outcome is that almost none of them look at the underlying assumptions of any of it. And somebody who actually cares about logic and actually cares about science understands that you can doubt and question and challenge things till you're blue in the face. If it's true, you can challenge it and doubt it 8,000 times a day. It'll still be true. You don't have to be scared of going back and going, wait a minute, is this premise, should we even question that? Because if your premise was right, you can question it and test it 1,000 ways. It'll still be right. But most people don't do that about any topic, much less like philosophy and political philosophy. So they never look at the underlying thing. And this is true of most pro-freedom people. It's just true of people about most things they think about. And so even just asking something as simple as, and this is actually why one of the main challenges of writing the thing for making Candles in the Dark and writing The Mirror, which is a program that'll eventually do Candles in the Dark by itself, is you can sort of think, well, here's a logical question. And then you ask it in most people's brain, like, okay, who gave government rights that you don't have and I don't have? Like, that's a very simple, basic question. And it's almost worthless for most people. If somebody likes to think and philosophize, they might go, huh, that is weird. But to most people, it doesn't compute, and smoke comes out their ears, and they're just like, well, what do you mean? We'd vote for, like, they can't even look back at the paradigm at something that simple, because that question is a very basic, simple, like, if I don't have the right to do it, you don't have the right to do it, how did that guy get the right to do it? Like, we can't have given it to him. I mean, that's very simple logic. This is 5-year-olds should understand this. But most people can't think about it because they have this foundational paradigm, and that would require them to look underneath that and go, wait a minute, wouldn't that sort of mean government doesn't have any rights that we don't have? They're just people? Yeah, that's exactly what it means. And the fact that something that simple logically proves that, and the vast majority of people have never thought about it. It's like, I can 2 + 2 = 4. That disproves what the vast majority of humanity believes about something, but most of them can't look at it because they're that paradigm is so concreted into their heads that they're like, well, we have to have something, or this is the system we have, or something. Okay, whatever other noise you want to make. How did you and me give that guy rights we don't have? I don't have the right to rob my neighbor. You don't have the right to rob your neighbor. How did we give that guy the right in the name of taxation to rob your neighbor? And the fact that this isn't like super sophisticated, this isn't rocket science. This is a level of concept and thinking that is just stupidly simple. And that's why most of what I talk about is just ridiculously simple stuff. But when people have a concreted in paradigm, like trying to chisel down to the most basic, simple, obvious stuff is difficult. And you have to come up with different ways to get them there. Because even just starting with that question, most people are like, well, we vote for it. Okay, does that, like, could me and this guy vote to steal your stuff? Well, no, it has to be, and you can see their brains sort of trying to reverse engineer it and make excuses for why, well, that wouldn't be okay. But when those guys do it in their big buildings, somehow it's okay. I don't really know why, but I know it is for sure. And that's the essence of a religious faith, which is what statism is. And that was a disturbing thing for me to come to realize is this is not something anybody came to logically. They were indoctrinated into the faith in this thing. And it's the same way if you ask somebody about their God, well, can your God do this? And if they can't answer and they get uncomfortable, like they're not gonna just be calmly discussing it. In the exact same way you ask somebody, how did government get, like, okay, so somebody wrote, like, my stupid little video, I'm allowed to rob you, where I wrote out, I'm allowed to rob you. That was like, I don't even remember how many years, that was probably pushing 20 years ago. And it's like, why do those people over there have the right to tax us? Well, the Constitution says Congress shall, okay, so a piece of parchment has some ink on it in a shape that says those guys have the power to tax us. Is it magic parchment? Well, what? And almost nobody had thought about that. So a ton of people, I just made that stupid little video, and a ton of people said that really started me thinking. And I was like, that dumb little thing? Like, it's so elementary. But when people have never examined the underlying paradigm, even the most basic, obvious stuff is really difficult and uncomfortable to look at and think about. And that's still true of a bunch of people who consider themselves to be mostly libertarian or mostly pro-freedom. Like, they still haven't looked at the layer underneath, which is just bonkers. And trying to get them to look there is the entire challenge. Because if you don't look there, if you keep that paradigm and that premise where it is, you're doomed. Like, if you accept the premise that somebody has the right to rule you, well, then the rest is bickering over, chairs on the Titanic. It's not going to help unless you can figure out, hey, they don't have the right to rule us.
Well, and that's one of the great insights that you get with your candles seminar. And for me, it was instructive when I saw your little graphics there, because I saw a human head or a human mind. And, inside is what I've now called the true self, which is your normal anarchist self in your private life. And then that false self, which is really the part that was indoctrinated, living in this little birdcage within the head in a fog that is never really interacting with that true self. And so it ends up not being a simple, almost an equation type of thing where you say, you don't have the right to do this. The state does it, therefore it's immoral. Oh, I see it. I'm anarchist now. No, it's the psychology of having to navigate that fog and find how for that person they can best on their own, basically, in their mind, come to understand that. So that's that's the challenge. Like you say, even for the libertarians to a great extent, they're not getting that root connection, which means it's still a process of having to navigate their psychology.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, you can look back at the arguments between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and the ones who, like, sometimes I wonder if, like, Thomas Paine was a closet anarchist. I think he was actually accused of that on occasion. And I don't know if he really was or not. But when they're talking about the basic things of and, you know, Frederick Bastiat writing the law, and just the discussion that people used to talk about these things, like, well, government can have rights that we don't. It has to just sort of be our representative. So and they already had the statism assumption, and they were trying to reconcile it with glimpses of understanding self-ownership. And so it's like, well, it's only legitimate if it represents us. It's like, well, if it represents you, it doesn't rule you. Those aren't the same thing. In fact, they're kind of opposites. Represents you is does what you want. Rules you is makes you do what it wants. There is no such thing as representative government. That's the exact opposite concept. But back then, at least some of them were talking about these ideas and concepts. But you could already see them trying to rationalize, like they have rational concepts, and they're trying to fit it into a paradigm in which they don't fit. And what comes out the other end is always nonsense. And it's the same thing that happens now when you talk to any statist, and they're trying to, even the simplest example, like even just boiling it down to, if it's wrong for you to do something, is it also wrong for you to get someone else to do the same thing for you? Almost everyone says yes. It's not that difficult a concept. And almost everybody is being a hypocrite, because almost every single voter then votes to have government do things that they know would be wrong if they did it themselves. They just don't notice that part. They don't think that far. And the lack of awareness of one's own beliefs and where they came from is amazing. And that's what Candles in the Dark is all about, is people have these strongly held political beliefs that don't make any sense, and they've never looked at the foundation. The way I became an anarchist was, I want to all the way be coherent and consistent in my political beliefs, and here's what government should be. I want to be able to break it down and explain the whole thing. And when I could, I was like, well, I can explain how people should be, but it's not government anymore. It's like that whole thing just sort of fell over, that people can organize and cooperate, but I can't justify government anymore because it's bonkers. And I finally looked at the foundation of the entire notion, and it's bonkers. But that's really uncomfortable, and it's including for lots of people who are mostly pro-freedom. It's still uncomfortable to say the entire game is bogus. You're still worshiping a volcano god. You're just bickering over how many people should be thrown in the volcano every week. That's not a fundamental change. The fundamental change is necessarily going to be uncomfortable. And people don't want to have to deal with that. They want there to be a practical solution, and there isn't a practical solution to an insane faith.
I'm curious about Candles versus the Mirror. In Candles, you can learn how to navigate that difficult road talking to a person. But the way, at least for me, the way it works is when I'm listening to them and learning their values, what they find important, where their lines are. Maybe it's just a limitation on my part, but I can't see how that can work that efficiently in a pure question and answer form. I know you've solved it, I'm sure, but I guess I can't put my head around that.
It can't, there are pros and cons either way. It can't be as, for exactly the reason you just said, it can't be as detailed and personal and probably as effective as somebody doing it one-on-one who's really listening to the person and finding examples they want, because it is limited. I now have the script, the interactive script finished, but that does have to be sort of simplified. Now, the simplified version literally has 2,000 questions. So it's not very simplified. And it's not, no one person's getting 2,000 questions. It's that it goes in so many directions based on what their answers are, that it has no loose ends. It never just says, you're too dumb, we're not talking to you anymore. but it has to be simplified. But I think it doesn't need to simplify it so much that it becomes worthless. I think it'll still be massively effective. And the fact that a billion people could be doing it at the same time and everyone have a different experience is why I was like, I need to do this thing. Even if I had a billion of me who could sit down, or a billion of you who would actually do this process with other people, you could get a lot more done. There are things it can't do. The funny thing is it has the advantage of they're not even in front of one person when they do it. So even if you're being patient and polite, they're still going to feel self-conscious when they get to the point where it's like, I don't even know what I think about this. And I'm sitting here feeling dumb because he asked me a simple question. Like, the program even relieves them of that, because there's not even one person in front of you. It's a screen. Amanda does the narration, so there's a voice, but there's not even a face. There's nobody looking at you. You can sit there and think about a stupidly simple question for half an hour, and nobody's going to be like tapping their fingers on the table like, can you not answer this simple question? But I'm really happy with the script, how it ended up. But yeah, it can't nearly be as personalized as a one-on-one thing. And it's so much of that is about listening. And of course, a program can't really listen, but it's basically me going through and thinking of the 8 gazillion ways that the conversation could go. I'm like, well, if he says yes to this, I know we're going over there and doing that. If he says no, we're going in a different direction. So it was basically me having several hundred different discussions with people and having to imagine. And a lot of the time I'm literally imagining a variety of different personalities and education levels for each question, because I don't want this, well, if you're super educated, you might understand the questions. No, it has to be anybody can understand it. And a lot of the questions have the simple version. And if you want more information, like the intellectual people would be like, well, it kind of means depends what you meant by that. Then there's the question which gets more specific and in depth for those people. But a lot of people are like, oh, that's simple enough. Yeah, I can say yeah to that. But if somebody goes, I'm not all the way clear, it has to have the thinker version of the question and then just the average schmo version of the question. So it was really involved. It can't ever be all the way as effective as one-on-one from somebody who's actually good at it. The thing is, like I said, it can do it with a billion different people at the same time. I can't. You can't. Well, I can't. I don't think you can have a billion independent discussions simultaneously. But it's the same approach, and it's still about having them bring out their real selves. And even a program can do that and have them know this is about what I think and what I believe. And they can be perfectly calm and there's no pressure, there's no rush, there's even less of a rush because there's no human being waiting for your answer. Because even when you do it politely, people put pressure on themselves. Like if you ask somebody a simple question, they don't like to be sitting there in silence for 15 seconds because they feel like an idiot. Like, this wasn't some advanced calculus problem. This was, what do you think about this? Which almost everybody will get to, because you can't have consistent beliefs and be a statist. So, but and this is why it's taken years. I forget how many years ago I had the idea for the mirror. At first I was like, it's impossible. It's too complicated. And I was like, well, I did the thing of it's impossible because of this. Well, unless you did that. But it's still impossible because of that. Well, unless you did this. And it's like, okay, it might just barely be possible. But yeah, you can't, obviously, a program can't really be as personal and as listening as a human being listening to another human being. But I think it'll be basically as worthwhile as an interactive program could possibly be. And then hopefully the people who do it will look more into it and talk to other people and like have more of the in-depth discussion.
Yeah, that's awesome. In every one of my episodes, the whole point is to find white pills, reasons for hope out there. And I've written or talked about Jones, and I've written and talked about candles. This is a good white pill prospect ahead of us, the completion of your mirror project. So, we will all look forward to that. And I think since we're close to the hour, we'll wrap up this first of the 2 parts discussion with Larken. Thank you, Larken, for a rich and entertaining discussion.
It's been fun.
Any projects or other topics you want to plug today before we close this part?
Well, he mentioned Jones Plantation and mentioned my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. I continue to be very happy with how many people read just that book. People who heard enough to start thinking about it and then read the book and was like, this is so obvious. It's like, yeah, it's my job to state the bleeding obvious in a way any idiot should be able to understand it. But it's weird watching people figure out that's what I already was. It's not, I'm going to talk you into a new faith system. It's, I'm going to get you to see that what you already were doesn't match this weird political stuff you were taught to believe. And it has nothing to do with me imposing my beliefs on you. So yeah, and that's the most dangerous superstition is to do that. Jones Plantation is to do that. Candles in the Dark is to help other people understand that. So yeah, that's enough things to mention for now, I think.
All right. Very, very cool. Now, folks, for Larken and me, we'll be picking up in a minute with part 2 of this interview. But for you folks out there, you'll see it as the next episode on the White Pill Box. And be sure to check the show notes for Larken's awesome content. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Take care and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.